right, everyone, thank you for being here. Welcome to the panel, How Can We Prepare Students to Participate Meaningfully in the 2024 Elections? We panelists will detail how we are preparing students to participate in the 2024 presidential contest and how we can still spur student engagement, from voter registration to cooperation with the Nassau County Board of Elections to classroom projects highlighting deliberative dialogue and issue research. My name is Rosanna Parati. I am a professor of political science. Among other things, I teach a class, and I am teaching a class this semester called Poli-Sci 114, Political Parties and the Voter. And there are a few veterans of that struggle in the room today. I'm accompanied by my colleagues, Professor Andrea Libresco, who is the Leo A. Goodhart Distinguished Professor in Teaching Excellence, Department of Teaching, Learning, and Technology. I'm going to introduce them both at the outset, and then they're going to do their own presentations. Professor Libresco teaches prospective and current teachers at the graduate and undergraduate level how to teach teachers, how to teach social studies. Her books include Every Book is a Social Studies Book, How to Meet Standards with Picture Books, also K through 6, Exemplary Elementary Social Studies, Case Studies in Practice, and Notable Books, Notable Lessons, Putting Social Studies Back in the K through 8 curriculum. We're joined also by Professor Phil Dalton, Associate Professor of Writing Studies and Rhetoric, and the Director of the Center for Civic Engagement. His presentation will be Making Democracy Work, Deliberating and Listening. In his teaching and research, Professor Dalton focuses on political communication, argumentation, and public controversy. His research is devoted to finding ways by which public engagement and open debate can effectuate legitimate and effective government. Professor Dalton has published 3 books, Swing Voting, Understanding Late Deciders and Late Modernity, also Coarseness in U.S. Public Discourse, which is co-authored with Eric Kramer, and Public Policy Argumentation and Debate, which is co-authored with John Butler. Thank you to both of them. Actually, all 3 of us are going to do a presentation. Then when we're finished with our slides, we're going to go up to the stage and engage your questions and answers and go back and forth a little bit. So I actually have a presentation, and mine is called Hofstra Votes and Hofstra Student Engagement. The news is better than you think. So I want to talk about youth voter turnout and how we've been trying to support youth engagement here at Hofstra University through Hofstra Votes. Each year, either in a course called Political Parties and the Voter or in an Intro to U.S. Politics class, I present information on the percentage of voters who turn out in federal elections. I first started showing these charts in 1996 and in 2000, when voter turnout in U.S. national elections was at a low point. What you're looking at there, the top line charts turnout in presidential elections. The bottom orange line charts turnout in off-year elections, which are for House and Senate, U.S. House and Senate. And we usually spend a long time looking at this and trying to figure out what's going on here. But one of the things you can see here is that over time, starting in the progressive era, voter turnout began to decline. And then there was another decline starting in the 1960s, but recently it's gone back up a little bit, and we'll talk about that. But in the context of discussing the percentages of people that turn out to vote, we talk about youth voting. And youth voting has been a particular problem, I tell students. An estimated 55.4% of all 18 to 29-year-old voters turned out in 1972, the first year following the passage of the 26th Amendment. The numbers for presidential elections were abysmal after that. So again, you're looking at the 18 to 29 segment, dropping to lows of around 40% in 1996 and 2000. And for off-year elections, those for House and Senate. Turnout trailed by 15 to 20%. 15 to 20% what we're looking at now. Youth turnout increased temporarily, you could see on the chart, when Barack Obama first ran for president, but once again slid down to the 44 to 45% range for the presidential elections of 2012 and 2016. In the off-year elections of 2014, turnout amongst college students hit a low of about 20%. But then Donald Trump came to office and everything changed. Voter turnout among all age groups surged in 2018. Voter turnout among 18 to 29-year-olds went from 20% in 2014 to 31% in 2018. And why am I comparing these 2 years? 2014 was an off-year election, just House and Senate. 2018 was also an off year. So you always compare apples and apples and oranges, oranges here being presidential elections. So voter turnout among 18 to 29-year-olds went from 20% in 2014 to 31% across the country in 2018, to a high of 27%, woohoo, almost 1 in 3 eligible voters in 2022. College student voting about doubled during that off year over the 2014 measures to a historic high of 39%, almost half. In 2020, again, despite the pandemic, college student voting rates skyrocketed, following stepped-up voting all over the country. As the pandemic increased citizens' reliance on mail-in and early in-person voting, college student turnout increased nationally from 53% in 2016. So that's a majority of college students coming out to vote for president. That was historic. And that brought us way back to the early rates we saw in the very earliest times after 1972. 53% in 2016 to 66% in 2020. So I want to step in and note that there are a few sources for these figures. It should also be noted that voter turnout rates here are rates of participation among eligible voters, not registered voters, which is usually higher. So we're looking at the number of people, college students, 18 to 29-year-olds, who go out to vote, who are eligible, not those who are registered. That would actually be a higher percentage. The Census Bureau's current population survey contains figures on the participation of young people from 18 to 29, as well as voter turnout in the older age groups. But the rates of college student voting are documented here by something called the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, which was first launched in 2013 by the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education at Tufts University. NSLV, NSLVE, collects information from nearly 1,200 colleges and universities of all kinds throughout the United States, including Hofstra. Tufts researchers match de-identified student records, that is to say, students who enrolled in college, with publicly available voting records, that is, the people who voted. So again, using both of those data sources, we can compare the turnout of college students who are noted here in blue and counted through the NSLV data, and that bigger group of 18 to 29s. College students turn out at a higher rate. No surprise, they have a higher level of education and probably engagement. Now, you can find out about national voting rates by simply doing some web research, doing census figures. But I want to turn to the NSLV findings regarding our own university. How's Hofstra doing in the realm of voter registration and turnout? How have we been doing in the past few years? Many in our university community will remember, and I've been here more than 30 years, that Hofstra had a successful bid to host a televised presidential debate in 2008, It was between Obama and McCain. And then again in 2012, Obama and Romney. In 2016, after Wright State University in Ohio pulled out, Hofstra again hosted, serving as a backup site for the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. It's hard to overstate just how much excitement these debates caused on campus, particularly the 2008 contest. By the way, on both partisan sides. Literally thousands of journalists converged on the campus seeking to interview students, professors, and prominent alumni. News organizations and notables from all corners of the globe camped out in our North Campus parking lots for days. The 2008 and 2012 debates were preceded by months of special events programming under PR campaigns dubbed Educate 08, Decision 12, and Debate 2016. News anchors, social science scholars, high-ranking public servants and debate commission, social science scholars, high-ranking public service and debate commission officials, and talking heads came to Hofstra to inform members of our community about the issues. From 2004 until 2020, political science professor David Green led groups of students to New Hampshire to hear the presidential candidates' stump speeches firsthand before the first presidential primary. The expectation in all of these activities was that in addition to raising Hofstra's national profile, these activities would raise student engagement. And yes, anecdotally, political science professors here could feel, particularly in 2008 and 2012, that interest in public affairs and civic engagement itself had grown at Hofstra. But it is not clear that that excitement was translating into increased rates of registration and voting amongst our students. We really have to look at the actual figures, and we can look at the NSOLV study to learn a little bit about what was happening at Hofstra. So I'm going to ask you what you think. These are the figures of national college student turnout in the years 2014 to 2022. What percentage of Hofstra students do you think was registered to vote in the last federal election? What percent do you think actually went out to vote? And more pointedly, do you think it was higher than the national average or lower than the national average? You are shaking your head yes. Why do you think?
I feel like it'd be higher than the national average.
Why?
I don't know, because it feels like they push a lot of it here.
Yeah, because we've been pushing. Anybody else? Anybody think it would be lower? Why?
I think a lot of Hofstra students are commuters. You know, they're not really on campus. So the ones who are on campus, they're probably more likely to vote, but the ones who aren't on campus, they just go home.
Yeah, I think both of those are very good hypotheses and could be tested. Here's something I will tell you, that when the first NSOLV figures came out after the 2014 midterm election, Hofstra's turnout was more dismal on our campus than the country at large. So you were right, actually, in 2014. 12% of Hofstra students participated in off-year federal elections in 2014, according to the NSOLV data, compared to 19.7% in NSOLV's national sample of 1,200 universities. Registration at Hofstra lags slightly behind too, but just by a tad. 64.3% at Hofstra were registered to vote and 65.3% nationally. Enter Hofstra votes. In 2018, the university turned its attention from presidential debates to voter registration and engagement. University marketing and community relations officials began an occasional tabling campaign in the Student Center atrium, joined by political science student volunteers enrolled in Political Science 1 and later Poli-Sci 114. They continued sponsoring candidate forums, speakers, and other events. This is not us, this is the higher-ups in the university, under the PR campaign entitled Hofstra Votes. So here's what happened. Here are the turnout and registration rates for Hofstra students in the off-year election since 2014. In the off years, Hofstra students have gone from a 12% voting rate in 2014 to a 38.4% in 2018, to a 33.5%, really 1 in 3, voting rate in 2022. But more importantly, Hofstra's turnout has gone from lagging behind national averages of student voter turnout to rising consistently above them. Even as student voting in 2022 declined, and it declined all the way across the country, Hofstra students' rate of decline was just a little more than half the rate of decline in student turnout nationally. In presidential years, the picture is positive as well. Not sure if I have that. Yeah, no. Hofstra exceeded the national turnout by 4% in 2016 and increased its turnout by nearly 20 points in 2020, exceeding the national student turnout rate by 8%. So what about voter registration? Since 2015, Hofstra has consistently exceeded the national average for student voter registration. Not by tons, but by a little. Its numbers are above the national average, with 88.5% registered in 2020 and 78.4% registered in 2022, which was the last off-year election. What we need to concentrate on is yield, or getting those students who are registered to be able to cast their absentee ballots or vote in person. Surely the increase in turnout at Hofstra reflects national trends. You can see it kind of hugs the national trends. But it seems to me, comparing the 2014 to the 2018 figures, that empowering students by providing information about how to register, how to apply for an absentee ballot, how to cast your ballot, that is key. If I've learned anything from teaching and observing the data, it has been not that Hofstra students need to get their act together, but that all young people need help with the mechanics of preparing themselves to vote, because it's complicated. Traditionally, the state of New York has been conservative when it comes to matters of voter registration and ballot access. But the pandemic brought several voting reforms to this state, including early voting, early in-person voting, and more recently, no-excuse mail-in ballots. In March 2024, that is in spring semester, the Nassau County Board of Elections designated Hofstra as an early voting location, a major change in our civic engagement landscape. The polling place was established through the Voter Outreach and Education Department of the Nassau County Board of Elections, which has partnered with Hofstra since 2018 to do nonpartisan voter registration and education. And, of course, we have Hofstra alums in the Board of Elections. Though turnout at this new polling site was very light during the presidential primary in the spring, Hofstra has had a major opportunity now to advertise the site in fall 24, that is to say, in the next few weeks, and mobilize Nassau County and particularly on-campus registered Nassau County voters to use it. But of course, there are challenges to students actually taking up and carrying through the right to vote. Hofstra's NSOLV report indicates that certain majors have lower voter turnout rates than others. For example, biology, business management, marketing, computer and information services, engineering technologies, physical sciences. First-year student participation lags behind that of the more senior students. First-year students, not only first-year students, but also male turnout trails behind female turnout, and that's pretty typical for across the country. Though Unsolved does not include race data for Hofstra specifically, we learned from Unsolved's national data that Asian, Latino, and Black student turnout has continued to trail the turnout of white students. And we know in the field of political science, we know that there are absolutely legitimate reasons why all of those things are happening both on our campus and across the country. Add to this a general disillusionment about voting based on widespread youth support for ceasefire in Gaza, disillusionment with the nominees. I wrote this in July, and it's changed a little bit. and the sense among students that their views are not represented well by the leadership of the two political parties. And you can understand why 100% of the students who are registered don't come out to vote. But I do want you to sear those dates in your memory if you're a Nassau County registered voter. You can vote early at Hofstra. In light of this, how can voting advocates proceed at Hofstra? Well, we've been working, a group of dedicated students, and I've been privileged to work with them, have been working on some short-term measures. One of them is to build a Hofstra Votes coalition. Hofstra Votes started as a university relations-directed civic engagement campaign. Under the university's new leadership, this campaign is funded by the president's office, and it rests in the portfolio of Shonda Washington, who is associate to the President Poser, for Government and Community Affairs. The Center for Civic Engagement Fellows provide the lion's share of the staffing for our tabling, you've seen it outside, and voter information activities under the guidance of a faculty coordinator, and that would be me. The fellows manage tabling. It's completely nonpartisan. They manage the outreach to student and community groups and outreach to, and we manage outreach to the Board of Elections. As coordinator, I'm responsible for planning voter registration and education activities. A second thing we can be doing as faculty members is to design curriculum to help stimulate engagement. Currently, a number of fall 24 classes are related to voting are engaged in projects. We're going to hear a little bit about Professor Libresco's, Professor Carolyn Eisenberg's Red State, Blue State seminars. They're closely tracking the election. Some of the students in those seminars will be working to organize student panels for Day of Dialogue. In my course, Political Parties and the Voters, students are assisting with voter information at the tables that you see outside. In INHOs for that class, we hope to produce blog posts about what it's like to be an election inspector and what it's like to be an election, a poll watcher. A third thing that we can do at Hofstra here is to steward our early polling place, to take care of it. Hofstra continues to hold periodic meetings with officials from the Nassau County Board of Elections. And by the way, we're the only university in Nassau County who has this early voting place, to make sure that the facilities are adequate for the polling place. Another thing, a fourth thing that we can do is to plan events. CCE fellows have been increasing student registration, turnout, and informed voting through pre-election events that are co-sponsored with student groups. I'll tell you a little bit about some of those. CCE fellows tabled all summer at first-year orientation and at the Welcome Week Club Fair. They attended the First Gen LLC dinner at the invitation of faculty mentor Katrina Sims and Dr. Russ Smith, director of the First Gen Support and Engagement. They staffed a voter information table at the med school's Welcome Week festivities. We joined with student activities to co-sponsor, along with the School of Comm, and with student leadership and engagement, a debate watch for September 10th, the televised presidential debate, and we'll host another one for the VP debate on October 1st next week. Hofstra Votes will be tabling and publicizing early voting during Day of Dialogue on October 23rd, Wednesday, October 23rd, with events planned by Hofstra fellows from the Center for Civic Engagement and faculty on the CCE Advisory Board. Another thing we can do is to continue communication and voter education. I've continued to work with the Office of Marketing and Communications here on campus to publicize the early voting site and upcoming deadlines through text and other forms of communication, and you're going to be receiving some of them as we get closer to early voting, October 26th. CCE fellows have mounted their own student-led social media campaign with the Instagram name @HofstraVotes. I hope I'm right about that. And working with marketing and communications to do the same. Over the long run, much needs to be done. In particular, we're hopeful that the Nassau County Board of Elections will tap Hofstra as an early voting site for local elections in 2025, next year, and then in off-year elections in 2026 and beyond. Our partnership with the Nassau County Board of Elections is strengthening. The Board of Elections plans to hold public voter registration events right here, outside of Monroe Hall, on this Saturday, and on Thursday, October 10th, from 2 to 9 p.m. So I'm going to stop yakking here and let my colleagues give their own presentations. But I do, before I leave the podium, want to give a huge shout out to the CCE fellows and other students who have been working with this effort. Again, a completely nonpartisan effort. We really don't care how you vote. What we care about is whether you vote. We should be winning or losing this election because people voted, not because people didn't vote. Those students are Hamina Haq, who is selected by All In, a national student voting advocacy coalition, as one of 137 students nationwide for the student voting honor roll. Leica Jerome, who's here and who's been tabling outside, Evelyn Quayle, who's also here, Adalis Pantry, Eliza Kazmi, I'm not sure whether the two of you are here, Michael Zamet, and of course all the students of Poli Sci 114, Political Parties and the Voter. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, we got to do that again. Good afternoon, everyone. That was decent. I'm Andrea Labresco, as you can see. And in addition to being in the School of Education, where I teach teachers how to teach social studies and run the doctoral program, I also am head of the civic engagement minor. And several of those students who were just named and properly heralded by Dr. Parati are students who took the Intro to Civic Engagement class and became civic engagement minors, which I urge you all to do. It's an interesting minor and it's interdisciplinary, so many of the courses you're taking in other areas will count. And it gets you thinking about the world around you, which is oh so very important. So I'm also currently teaching a course on the election, and I will tell you that on the first day of class, I had students anonymously write on index cards who they were leaning toward, and in parentheses, whom they might wish were in the race instead if they weren't so fond of the candidates. And we have a pretty split class, for which I am grateful. That makes for a wonderful class. And everybody's kind and wonderful to each other. And I just want to say that in advance because I think the ethic and the belief is that everybody who's on another side is very tribal and hates each other. That's not true in my class at all. Yeah, okay. My class is in the house. So, however, I am not unaware of the context that we all live in right now. And these are the kind of things people say, as you can see on the screen, about politics. You can see some of the lines are that it's divisive, it's corrupt, it's bad. The one that amuses me in there is not good, but chaos. They're not positive commentaries about politics. In addition, it says everybody's exhausted and angry when they think about politics. This is terrible for our democracy. This can't be how we go on. And in addition, ooh, this is the one I should have also done in advance. Well, we'll hope we get back. In addition, I just want to give you a sense. This is, first of all, this is the Pew Research Center, which is a nonpartisan center. That's important. When you think about the sources you're looking at, you want to make sure your data is coming from reliable sources, and this is a very reliable source and nonpartisan. So if you want to see where we've been and where we're going, this looks back at starting from 1994. It's not a good picture. And if I were to click on, I'm not going to click on this one too, but if I were to click on the one that was more people, you can see the other choice was politically engaged. The troughs are bigger. The people who know more about politics are more polarized. That doesn't feel like a good piece of information either, right? That's not a good trend. The more you know, the more you dislike the other side. That's a problem. Okay, now I got to go back, and here I am. Okay, sorry. Right? Okay. One more polarized context. A couple more. Whether you have friends in the opposing party. Again, this is the Pew Foundation. You can see that most people do not have friends in the opposing party. They have friends in their own party. Some of this is even happening because we choose to live in various places now where we will be surrounded by people who agree with us. And that builds on itself. The more red an area becomes, the less likely somebody blue wants to move into it. But you can see it's true for both parties. That's important. But these are not just statistics in the air. You should ask yourself whether you have friends who disagree with you on political issues. True confession, when my daughter was 4, and I come from a political household, she asked if a Democrat could marry a Republican. I won't tell you what I said. She's a Democrat and married a Republican, by the way. It's kind of interesting. So what they say about each other, close-minded. The other side is close-minded. They're dishonest. They're immoral, unintelligent, lazy. Again, how do you speak about folks in the opposing party? These are questions we need to ask ourselves. I love this cartoon. Can you see it all the way in the back? Okay, so I'll let you absorb it. Okay, we got it. So close-minded. Some of this is not your fault. Some of this is the algorithms, right? You land on a site and it sends you to the next site. You land on that site, it sends you to the next site. And you go down the rabbit hole of red America, blue America, whatever it is. But which ones do you start on? And do you visit a variety of sites? Do you watch a variety of channels? So what to do? I put Dewey at the top here because I am from the land of education, but also education and democracy. This marries both things that I do. And I love this quote: "A democracy is more than a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience." This is how we live every day, not just in an election year. You know, we pay a lot of attention in an election year to whether we're involved. But honestly, we should be involved all the time. We always have to get along with each other. We have neighbors. Do we talk to our neighbors about politics? Or do we think, oh no politics discussion, that's off limits? Why is it off limits? Can't we talk in a way where we are neighborly to each other? Like in my class, where people have different political persuasions and they are neighborly to each other. And prominent people recently have made these comments. At the DNC, 2 former presidents, as you can see, said, even when we don't agree with each other, we can find a way to live with each other. And Bill Clinton, I urge you to meet people where they are. I urge you not to demean them, but not pretend you don't disagree with them if you do. So you don't have to make happy with them, but you can speak with them as adults. Treat them with respect, just the way you'd like them to treat you. Arthur Brooks is from the American Enterprise Institute. Contempt makes persuasion impossible. No one has ever been hated into agreement after all. What we need is not to disagree less, but to disagree better. And if you think about contempt and anybody you've ever spoken to who appears to have it for you, you just tune them out immediately. Why would you listen to them after they are contemptuous of you? And I like the last quote a lot from Kurt Vonnegut. People are chemically engineered to live in community, just as fish are chemically engineered to live in clean water. It's an echo of Dewey, obviously. So what does Hofstra do, and higher education and communities at large, to address the potential polarization and not speaking with each other? Well, one of the things we have done through the Center for Civic Engagement historically at Hofstra is use these issue books from an organization called the National Issues Forum that is funded by the Kettering Foundation. And if Kettering, you hear that word and think, I've heard of Kettering, they also fund lots of cancer research. That might be the connection you have with Kettering. So what they do is they put out booklets that are on current issues that have at least 3 different options of how to deal with the issue. They purposefully don't do 2 options, because then we're into Republicans and Democrats, my way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong. So instead, they look at different ways. So you can see as an example, my class just did the immigration booklet about a week ago. And you can see the options, some clash with each other a little bit, but some are just different categories. Welcome the immigrants, be a beacon of freedom. Option 2, enforce the law, be fair to those who follow the rules. And then option 3, slow down and rebuild our common bonds, which, if that one's murky to you, that one had to do with whether or not people should speak English, and that would be part of our common bond in some kind of way. You can see the others. There's one about foreign policy. I put just an example of the voting one as well, since my colleague just spoke of voting. Make it easier to register and vote. Second one, do more to make elections secure. So those, a little clash. And then offer more and better choices. That one deals with gerrymandering, redistricting, the Electoral College. So they don't all exactly clash with each other. They're different ways of thinking about the same issue in ways that we fully explore them. And what you do in each one of these is you try on the position. You don't start that say, I gravitate toward position 1. You think about how to do it. It's dialogue, not debate. And you can see the differences, and I put the disclaimer up there. I don't think all debates are bad, so I want to be clear on that. But I do think that when you start off with a goal of having dialogue and deliberation, it's a really different goal than debate. I'm sure a bunch of you had classroom debates in your high school social studies classes, and I can tell you as a former supervisor of high school social studies that what I used to see when I'd go in and watch those classes is there'd be 7 people in the class who were really involved, and they were kind of talking back and forth at each other, and the other people were like watching a ping pong match. And I'd ask people afterwards, I'd ask the teacher afterwards, how was it? Oh, it was great. Everybody was involved. And I'd show them my sheet that showed 7 people spoke. And they'd say, oh, I didn't realize. It wasn't a way that everybody got involved. Some people pulled back, students pulled back because it was too scary to participate in a debate. People were mean to each other. Ad hominem attacks. That's not how debates have to be, first of all, but it is how they are sometimes. Whereas deliberation and dialogue is nothing like that. You're not trying to win. You're trying to try on a position. You're trying to understand the people who believe in that position. That's really different than the ethic behind a debate. So we have studies about deliberation and dialogue versus debate. This one was done in high schools, and you can see the N was 165 high school students, and N is the number, in ideologically diverse settings, and they did pre and post tests, as one does, and they found that you can see that views were more likely to change in a deliberation format. That's not the point of it, by the way. You don't have to give up your view when you are in a group together. You do not. But they were more likely to change. They were more likely to participate, and you can see 90% felt their views were respected. That's the most important stat to me on that chart. That matters if we're going to speak with each other. Think back to Dewey, conjoint democracy. So what kind of questions do we ask in these debates? The very first thing we agree to are ground rules, and I won't read them all to you, you can see them, but I think some of the really important ones are keep an open mind. It's okay to disagree, but do so with, and I love this, curiosity. You're trying to find out why the person believes what they believe. Not so you can slam them, but because you're trying to understand them, and that's a really distinct difference. At the beginning of the forum, you always ask what people's connection is. And I will tell you in my own class with the immigration forum, and this has happened absolutely every time I've done the immigration forum is people talk about their own backgrounds. And there's always somebody in the room who might be in a situation of precarity about their immigration background, or their family has been in a situation of precarity, or they know somebody in this situation. And it's a revelation to everybody else in the room who hasn't thought about it in the same way, because it doesn't, they're not in personal precarity. That's significant. We find out more about who's in the room with us, and then by extension, who's in America with us. How does it impact you in your life? Then you try on each option. What's appealing about it? What things are most valuable to people who support this option? That's, again, really different than a debate. Not, I'm trying to crush you, but what makes you tick? What do you value? What might happen? What are the drawbacks or trade-offs of each position? And then together, how come this is so hard to decide? Where are the gray areas? And I love this question that we all should ask in every single class all the time, which is, who is not in the room having this discussion with us? What might they say? How might that change our discussion? Because we can't have everybody in the room all the time. So who are we missing? What views are we missing? And then, now what? How has it affected your thinking? Not, did you change your view, right? That's not the question. What can you do as an individual? What can you do at the community level, at the state level, at the national level? And what do we still need to think about? What we know, we have research that indicates that when we do these things, we find out more about people, and we find out more that we may have things in common, or if we don't, that it's not scary or fraught to talk with those people. So I'm going to play one little excerpt for you here. It's a book, actually, I just finished coming to Hofstra. I listen to books. I read them too, but I listen to them when I walk and when I drive. And this book just came out, and I was actually inspired to read it from this excerpt on the NewsHour. The author, Jamil Zaki, was interviewed by Amna Nawaz on the NewsHour. I'm just going to play a 2-minute excerpt because he'll tell you about the study that he did of people speaking to each other. But I'll just say I was attracted, besides that I heard him on the NewsHour, is I need hope. I tend towards cynicism, and I appreciate the title of this, Hope for Cynics. We live in difficult times, so I appreciate this. All right, let me escape for a second. No, see, that doesn't do it. All right, maybe I'll just click on it. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Okay, right? Yeah, here it is. It's playing the ad anyway, even though I already did that? That's so not fair. What happened? Hold on. Yeah, but you know what? Maybe I just didn't press stop and it kept going because I really wanted at 2:58. So maybe that's what happened. Or maybe it went on to something else. Or maybe I'll just tell you about it. We'll see. No, this doesn't even look like anything. All right, I'm going to do that. Never mind. No. All right, I'm just going to find back where I was, which is here, I guess. All right, what if I just click on that? No, then I'll get the ad. Okay, so I'm not going to click on it. I'm just going to tell you, here's the brief thing. First of all, on the side, I'll say the side one first, then I'll tell you what the little excerpt is. So they did this survey in 2021, 80,000 Americans, right? And they identified more than 150 issues on which Republicans and Democrats agreed, and several listed here were endorsed by 2/3 of both groups. Overturning Citizens United, which is about campaign finance, DACA, passing DACA, which are the Dreamers, the children of people who were brought here young as immigrants, and then tax incentives for clean energy. 3 different, wildly different areas that people, 2/3 of both parties agreed on. But let me say the part that's on the excerpt, which is that they had 100 people agree to do phone interviews, phone discussions with a person who was on the other side of the issue. So one-on-one on the phone. And they asked them beforehand how they thought it was going to go. And the view was very negative, and then they interviewed them afterwards. And not just the great majority, but 90% of the people said it went wonderfully, that they spoke with people from the other side, whatever that means, right? And they had a positive experience. It doesn't mean they changed their view, but it means they enjoyed, that was the word, enjoyed talking to the person. The recipe they have in the book sounds an awful lot like the National Issues Forum stuff, right? Ask questions instead of making statements. Work to get underneath people's opinions, to their stories. What are their stories? When you spot common ground, name it. When unsure about something, say so rather than pretending to be confident. So nationally, they've done these kind of connected national issues forums, often connected to debates. So in 1996, they brought 500 people to Texas and had them have 2 days of national issues forum conventions. And again, it doesn't mean people changed their views, but it does mean they thought differently about the other people. And you can see the quotes. I saw an entire process develop. None of us knew each other. We discussed the economy, America's role in the world, pressure on families, and then we were able to formulate questions, and they got to ask them of the presidential candidates. The student says, democracy works when you see that people can talk together despite their differences, but that can only happen if you're involved. And then I love Carlos here. This is the first time anyone has taken an interest in what I think. Sad, but great that it happened for him. And then my impression for a while about this guy, Joe from Florida, was that you were just another one of those rich white guys. And even though I did not spend any social time with you, I came to like you and understand your feelings, even if I don't agree with many of your positions. That's good enough, right? That's good enough. Hofstra, too, then, has had a history with forums. In the time leading up to the 2012 debate, Hofstra they ultimately had over 100, but they aimed for and had 100 forums, not just with Hofstra students, in the community, Hofstra students and the community, at all the libraries, bringing older people to Hofstra. It was a big mixture. And CCE sponsored this. Center for Civic Engagement, and the person who headed it was Mike DiNicenzo, who ran the program. He was a history professor here at Hofstra and used to be head of the board of the CCE. And the students moderated them. The students were trained as democracy fellows, and they got a little stipend for doing that. And this is what they said: I no longer look at politics as being two-sided. We no longer seek the winner, but seek common ground. Polarized debates with no real attempt to find a middle ground frustrate me. And then what people said who participated, we refrain from party and candidate labels. We want to talk about ideas and values rather than who advocates them. Policy, not candidate. Deliberative practices are essential in electoral politics for voters to make an informed and unbiased decision. Now, an alum, almost, I guess, 10 years out now, Atana Jacoby was a CCE fellow, but she also became head of the Democracy Fellows. She had just graduated, and she sort of ran the program. And she taught people how to do the moderating. And as you can see, she said, I asked a class one time what they thought of the presidential debates. They mentioned a few zingers, and that's what the media shows you afterwards, doesn't it? How the candidates looked, the energy, people's reactions. None of them mentioned anything related to policy. That's why we deliberate, not debate. And then you can also hear her saying, when people finish with one forum, they're walking out and telling us, I didn't know I was so interested in so many issues. I didn't know the other party had so many valid opinions. If we come back a second time, they're self-reporting to be better, more active citizens. Atana, by the way, gave the public policy lecture 2 years ago, and she's a union organizer in Ohio. I don't want to oversell what we do, but I don't want to undersell its importance. We don't expect to solve the problem of America's role in the world or issues of national security in the basement of a library with 18 people, but that doesn't mean that the conversation itself isn't worth it. It could take you to unexpected places. So back to Dewey as I conclude my part. So we don't have to wait to grow up and have these discussions and vote. education isn't preparation for life. Education is life itself. And that's what it says on our doctoral T-shirts for, for our Hofstra doctoral program. But the person I quote here at the end is Michael Roth, who's president of Wesleyan. And he wrote an op-ed, and he's often defending the liberal arts and defending different points of view. And he writes for the New York Times when he does so everyone can read it. And you can see the title of his piece was, "I'm a college president, and I hope my campus is even more political this year." And there were, campouts at Wesleyan, as there were at lots of schools across the country with varying levels of success. And he says, and I hope this is true of your professors too, "Professors aren't in classrooms to entice students to share their ideology. They are there to challenge students to grapple with how much more there is to learn about any issue that really matters. And that is my greatest hope for the fall, that we will cultivate our ability to pay attention, to talk to one another across our differences. And then we get to make choices on election day. I don't expect agreement, but I do trust that our disagreements can lead to learning. It will be an exciting semester." I hope the same for all of us, not just in this room, but on this campus. And you can see I have one little plug there. Become a social studies teacher. It's the toughest job you'll ever love. I stole that from the Peace Corps. But do check out the School of Ed. Teachers are needed in all areas, but especially social studies, so we can have these discussions in places that matter. It's essential for our democracy. Thank you. Not that I looked at it.
Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Phil Dalton, and I run the Center for Civic Engagement. And what I'll be moving toward as I go is I'll talk about what Hofstra is doing presently with deliberative dialogue. But to preface those remarks, I'm an intercollegiate debater. That was how I started. I didn't do it like most who are very successful, where they start in high school and then they get recruited. I was, I guess, what you'd call a walk-on. But I was, I think, pretty good at it. When I arrived at Hofstra, I was asked to help out with some of the programming that Andrea just talked about. And I was skeptical. I didn't come to deliberative dialogue very easily because I wanted to know what it was. It didn't make sense to me. If I could get it all figured out through debate, why would I have to have a conversation in a room, in a circle of chairs, and invite everyone to talk when we just need those who have the knowledge to talk? So anyway, that's just a preface about how I arrived at being a big supporter of deliberative dialogue. And along the way, I'm going to make a couple of points. I think we can risk over-valorizing deliberation if we undervalue various forms of conflict and protest or even debate. So I'll explain what that means as I move forward. And number two, we criticize debate, I think, because it's shaped by the present moment. And what I mean by that is we're all looking for careers. And if you become a good spokesperson, if you learn public relations, no one's going to pay you to be ethical. They're going to pay you to win. They're going to pay you to get your argument across. They're going to pay you to protect your employer. That's how I think we look at a lot of argument these days. And I think it's unfortunate. So I guess I'm kind of inviting you to think of argument a little bit differently, to think of debate a little bit differently. And as I go, I'll also mention, too, that we have a lot of emphasis on talk in the culture. If you hear in the university often, we need more voices. We need more voices. We need more people at the table. Who wasn't there, as we ask in deliberation? And that's an important question. Who isn't there? But it doesn't matter if they're not heard. And that's, I think, the biggest miss in a lot of what we do with deliberation and conversation in the context in which we engage in that. So I'm going to move here to my first slide. And what I have up here is I invite you to think of public discourse as on a continuum. And on the one side, you have deliberation. And I'd say deliberation is kind of the goal, right? This is the ideal for a democracy where everyone can join Everyone can share their point of view. Anyone can test an idea. Somebody can offer an alternative idea. No one's denied access. The problem with that is we seldom arrive at it. And because that's the case, we have on the other end of this continuum agonism. And this is where protest belongs. If you belong to a community that seldom gets heard, and you're invited, well, come to the table, come to the town hall, and come converse with us, you realize after some time that doesn't work. And so you protest. And that's an important tool for people so that they can affect change in their world. So here to define agonism, it's most often used when the system is perceived by marginalized voices to have failed them, to have broken down. Voices are not considered in the development of policy. And so in these cases, you have demonstrations, protests, and forms of civil disobedience. The photograph you see there, which the full title, I think it's a Herald, is from a George Floyd protest. And I think we can agree that in the run-up to those protests, there were issues that were widely known that were not being addressed by people writing policy. So the next picture here, I think it's an interesting one. This is Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder kneeling with George Floyd protesters. And if you weren't aware that this picture existed, if you are familiar with the politics of Nassau County, you might be surprised by it, but imagine what it took to get him to kneel alongside protesters. It was good arguments, but forcing the public to listen. And once that happened, even the police took a knee in Nassau County. But deliberation is what we aspire to, right? As in a democracy, we should try, if we're functioning best, we don't need agonism because everyone's at the table, right? They're all being heard. And this is our ideal. A democracy wants voices to know they'll be heard, to create spaces where their arguments will be considered on their merits, and everyone wants the power and authority to influence the policies that govern them. We achieve this through debate, through discussion, and through dialogues. So what I have up here is, I compare on top debate in theory, and then debate in practice or perception. If you think about it, debate should be like the best way to test an idea. Right? I come up with a policy, here's my proposal to fix problem X. And then several of you get up and say, well, here's a problem with that, why it doesn't work, here's a limitation, here's an alternative. And then I consider those thoughts and think to myself, golly, I hadn't thought of that. That's pretty compelling. I agree with you. That probably doesn't sound too familiar, right? I don't know how many times, especially as a college student, where when I got into arguments, I conceded that I was wrong. Faced with evidence, I went back and said, yeah, I was wrong and you were right. And now I hold your position, or I'm more inclined to agree with you. I don't know that I experienced that, and I suspect a lot of others don't. But in theory, that's how it should work. But in practice or perception, it's often equated with verbal aggression. People may have trait argumentativeness, and given the opportunity, they will argue for fun. And that may not seem to others to be a very appealing place to be, right, in these arguments, such as the classrooms that Dr. Libresco is just describing, where 7 dominated discussion and others watch the combat go back and forth. But in practice, that is often how it does end up. So we can confuse it with verbal aggression, and from this perspective, argument is not the interrogation of ideas, of reasoning, and of support. It's verbal and performative strategy to win. And that's, I guess, not a good thing, right? But it could be different. It could be better. So increasingly, what counts as public deliberation excludes the following: engaging to learn. I debate with you because I want to learn your point of view. I want to learn evidence I hadn't yet considered. I want to see the flaws in my own argument. I don't think a lot of people do engage in debate for that reason. I wish they would. and engaging to subject ideas to scrutiny. Like I tell you my ideas so I can learn its flaws, which in theory, again, that's how it all should work. It also includes an important performative element, what counts as deliberation these days. Are we engaging one another to learn ideas and share our own, to promote our own ideas so that others know their strengths? Or when we enter into the public sphere, do we do it to incite? Do we do it to tell someone else where they can go? Is it inviting or is it exclusionary? And I'm going to put a picture up here that one of my students, Craig Menino, took at the Trump rally across the street. And I'd ask you, when you go out in public this way, it's performative, right? You're saying, here are my politics, but you're also kind of inviting the other side to maybe get angry at you. There were other examples of this that crossed my mind as I put the picture together and put my notes together. During COVID, there was a dad walking through Target holding his little girl's hand, and he had a mask on that said, "No more bullshit." And I thought that was no less than interesting that I encountered that in the public sphere, but it certainly was not an invitation to talk or consider one another's ideas. My neighbor has a flag with that phrase on it on his garage door across from the school bus stop on my street. And I had to explain to my then 10-year-old why that's going on and kind of frame it so that when he sees the neighbor, he doesn't think he's a mean person. That took some work. So what's the change? What's the shift that I'd propose? And I lean on the work of, to start, Susan Herbst, who has this book, Rude Democracy. It's not especially new, but it is interesting in the current discussion from the standpoint that she talks about something called hard listening. And what I loved about her book when I first read it was that in the second half of it, she talks about online discourse, that it is not invitational, that it is not, we don't invite one another, and we don't practice considering one another's ideas there. And if you spend any time in Twitter, it just doesn't look like the kind of place where you'd scratch your head and say, well, that's a different point of view, and give it some serious consideration. And that's exactly what she suggests doing, is if you are equipped with understanding of reasoning, of evidence, to go through these kinds of arguments and look for their merits or not, but to kind of skill yourself in separating the bombast and the anger and the ridicule and the rest that seems to dominate these spaces. Will you win an argument? Well, we'd suggest not trying, but to model a form of engagement that causes us to learn from one another. But this quotation's an especially good one. Better articulating one's claims and engaging in debate is one step in the pursuit of civility. But hearing the arguments and taking them seriously, engaging in hard listening, is equally important. Listening to in-person argument demands certain levels of etiquette, regardless of whether the conversation ends up constructively. Now, etiquette counts if you feel like you can have access to the conversation, right? As soon as it closes down to you, deliberation may not be the best course of action. You might have to move towards agonism. But if we're going to make this work, and if we're going to make democracy work, we have to step back a minute and listen to what other people have to say, especially if we're going to hope that they're going to reciprocate and do that to us. Before I get to that, it was probably about 8 years ago, I had a student, I was running the Honor Society in my department. My major is rhetoric and public advocacy. And we were asked to enlist our honor students in an effort to expand public deliberative dialogues. And I took some of our students to a meeting. And one of my students in the middle of the meeting said, okay, if I understand this correctly, I am supposed to sit and listen to somebody who might, say if it's on the issue of sexuality, tell me that I shouldn't have rights by virtue of who I am, and I should stay in the same room? And I said as a professor, no. And then I thought on that, I thought, wow, that was a powerful question. It really stopped me, because this is what you have to do. If you're doing deliberative dialogues, you're going to be talking about and hearing positions that just might be anathema to what you would accept. They're bad ideas and they're harmful, perhaps. So for a long time, that sat in my head, and I encountered this book then that helped me with it, Beyond Empathy and Inclusion by Mary Scudder. And what she does is describe three things that take place when we listen. The first is just the hearing, so that she calls that the auditory act. Another one is what she calls the perauditory act, and that is the exchange. Let's say I make an argument, and then you consider it and you agree with it or disagree with it. That would be the perauditory effect. But the illauditory effect is often what's disregarded, and that's the relationship built in the listening. It is the manner of engagement. And to illustrate that, when I go home and talk to my wife, how good a job am I listening if I'm looking at my phone as she speaks to me? Now, I may be convinced that I've heard everything she had to say, but she's right in reading that kind of behavior is rude, right? And is it making our relationship stronger? Probably not. Well, apply that to public forms of communication. If I sit at the edge of my seat as somebody disagrees with me, waiting for them to stop so that I can tell them why they're wrong and that I disagree with them and hate them, I'm not building a strong relationship, or at least a democratic relationship, with that person. So that's what she means by this, the illauditory act. So there are three things I'll pull out of this book that I like quite a little bit. One, Scudder explains that rather than assuming listening will resolve conflicts between citizens, we're better off trying to encourage citizens to accept and become more comfortable with political conflict, to grow accustomed to the fact that we may not resolve this thing now. We can part ways without having agreed, or without me having reconciled what's happened here, by concluding that you're just not a good person. But that you could be a good person, and that I could be a good person, and you think this way and I think this way, and we move on. We'll engage again later. And also look for common ground. It's been talked about. The next quotation I like, we listen for the purpose of considering what someone says. In listening, we show respect for the equal status of the person speaking, not for the person's ideas. And this is where I circle back to the student. I wish I had been equipped with Scudder's thinking when he said this. If you believe you have equal status with the person you're speaking with, engage them. And then when you disagree with them, tell them why, and don't hold back, right? And that's acceptable. And when I say don't hold back, I don't mean sock them. I mean, tell them why they're wrong. And let them know this isn't an abstraction that they're dealing with, but it's a human person, and that the decisions that they're making affect you concretely, right? So I like that quote. And the third thing that I pulled from the book is recognizing the cultural, experiential, and communicative divides between ourselves and others can attune citizens to the ways we remain closed off to others, as well as the urgent need for improved listening. So we can learn about how we disagree and also learn about how we agree and find the common ground that's been talked about. But we're not going to find that if we don't listen. So to talk from personal experience, I come from a working class family. My brother lives in Michigan. I got a brother in Indiana. I got a brother in Illinois. And one's a carpenter, one's a scale repair guy, and the other one's a lawyer. So he counts, but he doesn't help make the point. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when I go back, I am this stereotype to them. I'm a professor from the Northeast, and its proximity to New York doesn't add to my credibility. But they're my brothers, and they're my mom, and I love them. And I disagree with them about pretty much everything. But I know where we have common ground. I know our common ground so well, I won't share some of it with them because I don't want them to feel emboldened. But I do have to listen to them, or I have to stop going to Thanksgiving dinner. Or if I do, I just got to go and dislike them under my breath or text my wife during family time or something. Don't want to do that. Okay. So what are we doing here on campus? What you see in the photograph is a deliberative dialogue. So we picked this back up. It was started years ago, as Dr. Libresco mentioned. It's not yet on the scale of 100 in a year, but that certainly is something we'd aspire to. But here you see us meeting in the Bennington's class, Dr. Bennington and Dr. Bennington, talking about climate change. And we have more of these scheduled. We'll be visiting classes next week. And we have CCE fellows who are currently being trained. Dallas Pantry, Danae Lewis, and Ashley Hernandez. They held one yesterday in Breslin 205 and talked about immigration. And it was a small crowd, but it was a good discussion. It was actually a much better discussion given its size than I anticipated. But that's what we're working towards. We want to come into classes and talk about issues that are relevant to the curricula and to get people hearing from one another. One thing that stood out to me recently is I visited one of Dr. Libresco's classes as she held a deliberative dialogue. I wanted some fellows to come along. And she talked about immigration. And you had maybe 25 students in that room, and I would say 70% of that group either was an immigrant or had a person in their immediate family who was an immigrant. And I think that surprised folks in that circle as they talked, that it was so immediate and so not abstract. It was such a concrete issue that directly impacted people that were sitting across from them that they may have assumed it would never have impacted or was several generations back. So that's the sort of thing you see and experience in these deliberative dialogues. And so we're talking about climate change and immigration. As you see up there, images of the issue guides that the National Issues Forum Institute puts together. And I'll note, if you're interested in doing one, the day of dialogue is coming up on October 23rd, and at 8 a.m., that's early, so we'll provide you breakfast. We're going to have deliberative dialogues in the morning. So I have a sign-in sheet in the back, so if you could give us your name and your contact information, we'll get that. We'll be in touch and have you come and be a part of that. Hope you will. There's a lot in store that day. We have a student-led forum on election issues, a panel on nationwide efforts to reverse DEI initiatives. There will be a speaker on Middle East issues, a panel on political and union organizing, women in leadership, and the ERA matter being on the ballot here in New York. And to expand that further, as already been mentioned, we have a civic engagement minor. We also have a conflict and peace and conflict studies minor that is run by Dr. Paul Fritz from political science. And I'm getting a note in the back that I'm running out of time, so we need time for questions. So I have to wrap up there. And thank you very much.
I'm feeling almost as if this entire format is wrong for what we've just set the stage for, because right now we should be listening to you. We might, let me ask you if you have questions of the presenters to just get things going. Does anybody want to start off with a question about what you've heard here or a comment about what you've heard here? As you're thinking about that, and I see there's a microphone in the middle, as you're thinking about that, I might initiate a couple things that struck me. And I guess I would ask both of my colleagues here about what's going to happen on October 1, which is vice presidential debate. The Democratic and Republican candidates for vice president are going to debate on national television. It is what it is. That's what we're all going to be served. Do you have any advice for students about how to take that in, if at all?
I can go first. Well, one thing I'd say is take it in here at Hofstra. If you're at Hofstra, I know that they had a debate watch for the presidential debate, and I hear that was such a success that they're planning to do one for the vice presidential debate as well. So it's fun. I know politics sometimes is tension-filled, but it's fun to watch it with a group of people. It's truly small d democratic as you hear what other people are thinking and feeling as they watch the debate. So I'd urge you to do that here, and I'll just say parenthetically, and then I'll really answer, that my very first presidential debate when I was a high school teacher was in 1984, and I had people come to the school, parents, kids, from 9 to 10:30, and then we talked about it afterwards. It was kind of crazy to do it with parents and students alike, but it was excellent. So you feel not alone in your choices when you are with a group watching a debate. That's a good way to do it. But more to the point of what you were asking, I think what you want to do is try and rise above whatever you think the sound bites are. Although I will confess that I like trying to predict what the sound bites are going to be as I listen. I'm not immune to that. But I also try and listen for any kind of policy clash, because that's always how I'm hoping people are going to vote, is based on policy. I know it's naive. People often vote more on personality and a feeling. But as somebody who's very data-driven and reliable data-driven, I am always hopeful that people will vote on policy. So I would listen for policy clash. The one other thing I'd mention is, the big issue, I think, in the first debate with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, as opposed to the Joe Biden debate with Donald Trump, is the role of the media in shaping the debate. I think that's an interesting thing to pay attention to. In the Biden debate, the moderators were critiqued. Dana Bash and Jay Tapper were critiqued for not pointing out falsehoods. And then in the most recent debate, the moderators were critiqued for pointing out falsehoods. So that's another thing to think about yourself as to what's the role of the media. I know that's not what this panel's about, and I attended the role of the media panel, and it was excellent. But that's something to think about, because they shape how you feel about the debate.
I would say there was a study done by a woman named Diana Carlin, who found that in the debates there is more policy clash than if you were to hear people talk about them, they assume there is. There is a lot more policy talked about than we assume. So look for that. If we apply the hard listening that I was talking about, listen for substantively what is said, how it is reasoned, and how people use evidence if they do. The other thing to mention is the use of misleading statements or inaccuracies in debates. And I would say it seems recently we're seeing inaccuracies being used not to mislead people necessarily, but to draw attention to an issue area. I would say be aware of that as a rhetorical technique. to not necessarily tell you the truth and disregard. They will disregard the truth, but as long as we're talking about that issue, they've got you on the ground that they want, as opposed to the ground that their opponent might have you reasoning on.
And actually, if I could just add one point, because I just read this op-ed piece in the Chronicle this morning, the Hofstra Chronicle, and I urge you all to read it. It's good food for thought. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the author. I just read it, but it's talking about the difference between neutrality and objectivity. And that's an interesting thing to think about as you approach a debate, at what we expect from the moderators. Is neutrality allowing anything to go through, and I will not comment, and the author of this op-ed said, yeah, but objectivity will call out when something is objectively false. So again, think about where you stand on that issue. And I urge you to read the op-ed, and you may agree with it and you may disagree with it. That, as my mother used to say, that's what makes horse races.
Again, I encourage you to ask questions if you have questions about any of the presentations. I'm thinking about so many questions I would love to ask you, and that maybe I want to ask on your behalf. But here's one of them that I was thinking about as I was listening to my colleagues, who are both really committed to encouraging deliberative dialogue. You are working to have more deliberative dialogue on campus and to stimulate more openness and speaking across our divides. How would you advise somebody to do that in their own circle? Because most of us, we have a household maybe, and we have maybe the people we hang around with are the people in the major, and maybe we would like to talk with them about these things, but we lack the skill to do that. We need to think about how to do that. So how would you advise us as individuals?
Well, I'll go first briefly. Sure. So, as somebody in education, I appreciate when people write their questions out in advance as a teacher. It doesn't mean you follow all of them, but it means you have them. That's why I put the questions in the PowerPoint. I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel on how to talk to each other. I think the National Issues Forum is one place that has come up with excellent questions that help guide us, including that people agree to ground rules at the beginning. I think that really matters. Yeah, let's talk about this at Thanksgiving or wherever, but let's agree that we can stop the discussion at some point. Let's agree that we're going to use this kind of language. Let's agree. I know that sounds formulaic, but formulas help people to talk with each other sometimes. And just to give a little personal example, when my daughter and son were in 3rd and 4th grade, they began at my elementary school a program where people would, 3rd and 4th graders would learn how to become mediators. 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds. And they'd learn, they had a list of questions they had to ask. If kids had little fights in some kind of way, that they would be the mediators. Well, on a vacation once, somebody came and knocked on our door and asked my daughter if she would mediate their argument, which was hilarious. My husband and I were just hiding behind the door laughing. And here's what happened, though. She asked the question you're supposed to ask at the beginning, which is, do you agree that, that you're trying to get to win-win? And one of the little boys said, no. And so she said, then I cannot help you. But I think the ground rules matter, actually. I think they help us be deliberate about that we're going to talk to each other, and this might be tricky, so we're going to agree to some things. And then you can use some of the actual language. There's no shame in using a script.
3 things come to mind, if I understood the question correctly. The first one is to be aware of the tendency to face save when you get into discussions with other people, and that is the perception you may develop that if you're losing an argument, that you're kind of losing status, or somebody perceives you as having lost. And given that tendency, find a way to, well, at least by virtue of awareness of it, to not let it control you. Because even if, I mean, what do you really get out of winning an argument? No one gives you a trophy, and no one's posting on social media. Really, I saw Phil Dalton dunk on this kid. No one's doing that. You just walk away with this self-feeling. So just be aware of that. Another thing is to ask questions out of genuine curiosity about who a person is. How did they get there? If it is so foreign to your way of thinking, you should want to know, where could that possibly have come from? Where did these ideas come from? And listen to learn. And the last thing is be self-deprecating. So if you're in an argument with somebody else, or you can expect one just because a certain conversation came up, be willing to joke about your own position so that others are more comfortable loosening up about their own.
Amen.
Thank you so much for your attentiveness today, and we'll keep it going. Keep faith. You know, that's the difference.